Because if we try to extol the recommendation role beyond a certain level, then we are rewriting Article 370. So the recommendation role is a very minimal role. And how is it being understood in different contexts? We have
does a recommendation postulate a positive recommendation, or does it mean just any opinion?
It is an advice. It is an advice. So it's an advice to facilitate and enable the president to find as to whether Article 370 has served its purpose and to close it. So the whole clause 3 of Article 370 is to render Article 370 inoperative.
But what
in that context?
Suppose there is a Constituent Assembly.
Yeah.
We'll not go into this issue of the Constituent Assembly and the Legislative Assembly. And the Constituent Assembly recommends to the President, do not abrogate Article 370. Is it open to the President then to override the advice?
That power of recommendation is not available to the Constituent Assembly.
Sorry?
The Assembly has to only recommend the President in regard to rendering Article 370 inoperative. The President seeks that advice from the Assembly. The Assembly will not say, I have my different thinking on Article 350 and I'll ask you to retain 370 the way we want it. So therefore, the advice, the recommendation
is not just an opinion.
Yeah.
When the Constitution uses the expression recommendation, it means a positive decision, because Article 370 uses different phrases. It uses consultation, it uses concurrence, it uses decision, and it uses recommendation.
Certainly right. So therefore, the use in Article 370 of all these distinct expressions, concurrence, consultation, have their context. So therefore, recommendation is seen as an entirely distinct idea altogether. If the Constituent Assembly was to...
contending that even if the Constituent Assembly were to say that please don't abrogate 370, the President can still abrogate 370?
She can. She can. Recommendation is not binding on the President. Therefore, it is recommendation. It is not concurrence. So concurrence for the purpose of concurrence for the purpose where you get the provisions of the Constitution extended stands in a different thing altogether. Consultation where the Parliament will enable to enact during that period. Consultation. So recommendation occupies that it comes at the end of the day when all the parties have understood that the job of 370 is done. What shall I do? The President says, let me know what I shall do now. I want to probably say, I have taken stock of all the presidential orders issued. The constitutional integration process is over. Now, is there anything left by way of invoking Article 370 or extending the provisions of the Constitution of India to J&K? That question will have to be necessarily asked. When that question is asked, what is the role of the Constituent Assembly? So, if the 370 had envisaged a larger role, that would have defeated the very purpose of constitutional integration. Therefore, the only relevant
Mr. Attorney, the use of the expression recommendation is not by itself dispositive of the content of the expression as to whether it is merely an advice, whether it is a condition precedent. I'll give you two examples. See, there are two examples in the Constitution where the word recommendation is used. Article 109 and 117. Yes. Article 109 deals with money bills. A money bill, after it is passed is not introduced in the Rajya Sabha. Always introduced in the Lok Sabha. After the bill is passed by the Rajya Sabha, by the Lok Sabha, it is transmitted to the Lok Sabha, to the Rajya Sabha for its recommendations. Those recommendations are not binding on the Lok Sabha. It may either accept them, it may accept them in part, it may reject them. That is what Article 109 says. So in Article 109, 109(2), see the way it is worded. The recommendation of the Rajya Sabha doesn't bind the Lok Sabha on a money bill. Now see 117. 117 says that a money bill cannot be introduced except on the recommendation of the President. 317.
Your Lordship, please, sir.
A bill or amendment making provision for any of the matters specified in subclauses A to F of clause 1 of Article 110, I'll go to 110 in a moment, shall not be introduced or moved except on the recommendation of the President. Now, in Article 117, the same word is used, recommendation. Recommendation is mandatory. You can't move a money bill unless there is a recommendation by the President. Now comes 370. There are many other provisions of the Constitution. I think, if I'm not mistaken, in my dissent in Aadhaar, I had analyzed those provisions of recommendation. Now see 370. It says, provided that the recommendation of the Constituent Assembly of the state
Shall be necessary.
shall be necessary before.
That's right.
Shall be necessary and before. So it's a condition precedent and a condition in terms of time. It can't be a post facto recommendation. It has to be before. What is the reason for it? There has to be a recommendation by the Constituent Assembly for the abrogation of Article 370. And second, that recommendation has to be before the President decides to abrogate. President.
My submission is not to slight that recommendation rule, but I say it's still only a recommendation. Let me try to explain. The necessity of having a recommendation does not content to the role of recommendation. There is a procedure which is required because during the constitution integration process.
So your
many
contention is that
parties
you have to have a recommendation.
Yes.
And it's not binding. It may be a positive or negative recommendation. The President can override whatever is said by the Constituent Assembly.
No, the reason why, therefore, what I would call a minimal role of recommendation given to the Constituent Assembly is in the context of one, the scheme of Article 370, and that being part of the larger integration process, can a body like the Constituent Assembly of J and K can have a final say on Article 370? It is not a constituent body of a Parliament of India. It doesn't have all that attributes and powers. So the recommendatory role has been assigned in the context, keeping in mind that once the constitutional integration process is completed, in the understanding of all the parties involved, there has to be a terminus. And to bring the terminus to a completion, then the role of recommendation is assigned. Otherwise, the Constituent Assembly could have been probably given the powers of consultation, concurrence. Why is state government coming into Article 370 at all? So it's only at the end of the day when you have done all that job. It's a stock-taking exercise.